Hey guys, this is Caleb with DSLR Video Shooter, and today we're going to talk about 10 tips when it comes to buying LED lights for video. I'm going to start off by saying I'm not going to be talking about specific models of LED lights in this video. I already have a video talking about lights under $50 that I recommend and compare them against each other. And next week I'll have part 2 of that series, which is going to be lights between $50 and $100. So that'll be 2 videos with roughly 20 lights that you can check out. So this video is going to be talking about some things to consider when looking at LED lights in general, because there are several factors to consider. So number one is your budget, because now that these lights are getting better and more affordable, you kind of have choices between buying a larger one expensive light or using that same money to get several smaller lights. So that's something to consider. And that brings us to number 2, which is your use, how you plan on using these lights. If you're starting from scratch, obviously you need to factor in several different lighting setups and, get a couple of lights. So you might be better off getting some smaller, more efficient ones than 1 or 2 large ones. And you also want to think about use, just because some of these lights are very specific in how they're designed to be used. Some are more spotty, whereas others are soft, and there's several things we'll be getting into in a little bit, but that's something you want to consider, is what you're going to be using these lights for. The next thing you want to consider is output or luminance, and this is usually measured in lux or LM or something like that. But you want to pay attention to those numbers, and usually they're measured at a certain distance. And don't be fooled by the number of LEDs, because that can be a bad way to go about it. Because if you think about it, some lights will have a 500, 600, 1200 LEDs, but the actual LED chips or bulbs they're using are really weak. So I have a couple lights that we'll be talking about in a future video that looked very promising, but once you actually set them up and turn them on, it's pretty pathetic how dim they are. So you definitely want to look into the luminance level of each light, and do not be fooled by the number of LEDs, because that can sometimes mean nothing. The next thing to consider is the color rendering index, or CRI, of the lights you're going to be purchasing. The higher the number, the better. So the sun has a CRI of 100, and that CRI rating is essentially how accurate the light reproduces color. So usually 95 to 98 is as good as you're going to get. I probably wouldn't dip below 85 unless you're on a real tight budget. And there's a lot of great options out there now when it comes to high CRI, but you definitely want to make sure you look into that. So if you're purchasing a light and it's not listing the CRI, chances are it's under 80, which you're going to get some color shifts, casts, weird hues, things like that. Whereas a lot of lights that are out now, you can find a lot of good CRIs, like Aputure pretty much. All their lights are CRI 95 plus. So just be aware of that when you're looking for LED lights. The next thing to consider is color temperature, and you really have 3 options. You have daylight, which is what I'm using right now for my key, or you have tungsten, which is a warmer 32 to 3300 Kelvin. And then you have bicolor, which are lights that can produce both of those color temperatures, either by mixing them together or by just having separate LEDs. Now, the way most of these bicolor lights work, at least the more affordable ones, we're talking under $500, is that half of the LEDs are tungsten and half of the LEDs are daylight. So you're either mixing them or you're only using half of the bulbs. This means you're only going to get half of the output, even though you have all these LEDs at your disposal. So as an example, this light is a daylight only light, and I can turn it on here, and there's a dial. So that is full tilt, wildly bright, whereas this light, even though it has the same number of actual LEDs, it's only going to have half of the outputs. I'll turn that off, and there's the other one. So you want to think about that. If you want lots of light, I would highly recommend you go with one color temperature. Probably daylight is what I would recommend. And if you need to use it in a tungsten or warmer environment, you can always use video gels, which will warm up the light significantly. But that way you won't be losing output, because it's really sad that if you're at daylight or tungsten, you're only going to be using half of the LEDs. So something to consider. You have to choose between convenience of being able to just dial in the color, or output of the light and take full advantage of the number of LED diodes, chips, or bulbs you have. The next thing I'd consider when it comes to buying LED lights is power options. A lot of them have battery solutions, and I'll talk about batteries in a separate video, but Sony MPF style batteries are very prominent with these lights. So battery option, does it have a battery option? That's going to be important to consider. Larger lights will have stuff like VLOC or multiple MPF batteries. And the other thing to look for is a DC jack. So is there a way to power the light with a cable so you don't have to have batteries on it all the time, which is important in a studio environment where it's nice, we have outlets everywhere, why not put them to work? So that's something you want to look for and think about, because a lot of lights only have battery options. The next thing to consider when buying an LED light is the beam angle, or how soft or harsh the light is out of the box. So this light right here is actually a spot bulb, i.e. the LEDs are designed to be more spotty and a more narrow beam. So it's going to be more like a spotlight than it will be a big, soft floodlight. That's something you want to definitely make sure you check out. In general, I prefer lights that aren't as wide of a beam, because I can always increase the beam angle. So if I stick this on a stand and I put a silk in front of it, it's going to turn that into a nice soft light. In general, I don't like floodlights because often you're wasting the light on the outside of that beam. So if you're thinking about a key light, if I'm going to be shooting it at myself or through a silk, a lot of the light on a floodlight is going to be wasted on the edges of the room that I'm not going to even be using. So in general, spot is what you want, and the only reason to go with flood is if you want to light a really large area, like a giant room, or if you don't want to use any light modifiers and just stick the light in front of you, but you still want some softness. So a light like this guy, which I've talked about in my other video, or this one up in this corner that has a built-in milk diffuser, which we'll talk about in a future video, are great options if you just want to slap a light in front of you and have it already be pretty soft. Another factor when purchasing LEDs is to choose multi-chip or multi-bead or single chip. So here I have a single chip, and the difference is here we have just essentially a PCB board with a ton of LED either chips or beads. The plus side to this is they're very affordable because it's easier to manufacture. Each LED is a little more affordable versus a giant chip. The downside is that if you try to cut this light with either barn doors or a flag, each single one of these LEDs is going to create its own shadow. So instead of just a line of light, you're going to see a bunch of little lines with all the different shadows. This can be avoided with softening up the light, but you still won't be able to get that harsh spotlight and be able to cut it with barn doors or a flag. Whereas large chip, they work a little differently. It's one large light source essentially with a bunch of tiny, super high powered LED diodes essentially. The beauty with these is that they are wicked powerful, so much light output, but you can actually cut them, and it acts more like a single source. So when you cut it with barn doors or try to block the light, you get one shadow instead of multiple shadows. The other nice thing about these is they are just crazy, crazy bright. Let me turn on this one, turn it away from you guys. As you can see, wildly bright, and I don't even know if that's all the way up. Yeah, you can dim this one a little bit. There's lots of models out there. Right now, probably the best one is Aputure COB light. This one is also one that I've used for a long time. That's the Alzo 3000. They also have one much brighter than this. The downside to using these is the size. You can see how much larger this is, but the plus side is the amount of light and some accessories you can get with it. So let me turn this back off. Swing it around here. So this light and many other lights like it use Bowen mounts, which can give you tons of accessories, snoots, barn doors, giant soft boxes like I'm using on another one of these lights. lenses, you can focus the light. There's so many different options for mounting accessories. So they do cost a little more, but the output you're getting and the flexibility is pretty great. Something else you want to pay attention to, which is kind of hard to do just by looking at specs, is to pay attention to what I call edge color distortion. So a lot of these lights, they're really affordable because the LED bulbs aren't as high quality, and often what you'll find is that the center of the light, you know, spill essentially, or if I'm pointing it right at myself, right in the middle of wherever you're shining the light, looks good, but as you get to the edges, you notice a color shift, or there's essentially a ring around the outside of the light spill, and that's because of the way the LEDs are coated and the quality of materials when they actually manufacture these LEDs. So usually if you stick with a higher CRI, you're going to be able to avoid this, but it's definitely something to look into and try to avoid. The next thing to consider are just extra features. So things like battery level indicators or little LCD screens on your light, bicolor, channel selection, so if you can control it with a remote or with your smartphone. A dimmer is a big one. I probably wouldn't buy a light unless it had a dimmer, and that's pretty standard these days. Other extra features include things like barn doors. Does the light have optional or built-in barn doors? Does it come with a mount or ball head? You just want to think about all these things when you're picking them up. Extra batteries, cables, all that kind of stuff. So those are the 10 things I would recommend you consider when buying an LED light. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Let me know if there's some tips you think I missed, and definitely stay tuned for my part 2 of my LED series, where we're going to talk about LEDs in the range of $50 to $100, and also check out my video talking about the best LED lights under $50. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next video.